Welcome to the Nintendo Repair Shop's N64 repair video. In this video we'll show you how to replace an N64's analog thumbstick and clean button contacts to resolve sticky or non-responsive N64 controller buttons. The parts you'll need to complete the N64 controller repair are available in our N64 controller repair kit. They include an analog thumbstick, newly manufactured, a bottle of our game cleaning rinse, non-static game cleaning pads, and not available in our kit but available at most households and hardware stores is a small Phillips head screwdriver. To begin the N64 controller repair, we first have to identify and remove the screws holding the top and bottom controller case together. There are a total of 9 screws holding the cases together. Those screws are in the following locations. The first 2 are here on the inside of the memory card port, 2 more on the main section of the controller, the back side of the controller, 2 more on either outside handle, and 1 in the center handle. With those screws removed, we can now unseat the back side of the Nintendo 64 controller case to expose the back side of the motherboard. Now, with the motherboard exposed, it's important to understand what each area of the motherboard is responsible for, as it may look a little different than it did when you had the case together. Now we'll walk through each of the areas now so you have a clear understanding before we go through the process of repairing it. These 2 sections here are the left and right buttons. This section here is responsible for accepting memory cards and rumble packs. This section here is the Z button, which is actually on the back side of the analog thumbstick. Now when you're doing an N64 controller repair, most often people are after replacing a bad analog or worn out analog thumbstick with a newly manufactured one. But while you're at it, it's worthwhile to go ahead and clean the button contacts to make sure that those buttons are responsive and stay that way over time. Now to get rid of the old analog thumbstick, we actually need to detach 2 different things before we take out the screws. And those 2 things are the connector to the motherboard and the Z button. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Lightly pull on this. It's not too difficult to get off. If you ever knock any buttons off out of alignment, they're not too tough to get back in either. And then for the Z button, this is actually a little different, a little more challenging. There are these 2 tabs holding it in. You simply need to pull one of those tabs away and slide that Z button out, just like that. And then we can go through the process of removing the 3 screws holding in the analog thumbstick, which are located here, here, and here. This smaller black screw, it's unnecessary to remove that one. Now with the analog thumbstick screws removed, you can go ahead and take that part away and set it aside, as we'll be replacing it with our new analog thumbstick in time. But first, as I mentioned, we want to go ahead and clean the button contacts on the rest of the controller. So in order to do that, let's remove the rest of the motherboard. First step is getting the controller cable unhooked from its seating. And then from that point forward, it's really just a job of pulling out the motherboard away from the plastic holders. Once you get it pulled out, hopefully your buttons stay there in their spots, so you don't have to replace those. And you can just spin over the motherboard and clearly see where some of those contacts are that we're going to be cleaning. So again, before we jump into actually cleaning anything on this motherboard, it's important to again understand exactly which buttons are which, in case one specific button is giving you more trouble than the rest. Again, these buttons up here are the left and right shoulder buttons. We can go ahead and remove those plastic buttons for now so we can get access to the motherboard. And these buttons here are your directional buttons, your up, down, left, right buttons. This is your start button. These are your A and B buttons, and these are the yellow directional buttons. So to get started with our cleaning, we'll go ahead and transfer the game cleaning rinse to our game cleaning pad. Just a little bit does it. And then we'll go through the process of rinsing off each of the contacts lightly. And you can see there just a little bit of grime and oily buildup is coming off. Just a little bit. This controller was in pretty good shape. we also want to go ahead and take the button off of this Z button and get that as well. Don't want to forget that. So you can see not much, but just enough to cause some disruption. And then of course we're going to go after the buttons too. And you'll finish up by doing the same thing to each of the buttons. Alright, now with each of the buttons put back onto the motherboard in the correct spots, we can go ahead and go through the process of putting the motherboard back into the casing. And just have to really line it up with those holes there. And then going ahead and feeding the cord back through. Those tricky shoulder buttons. Alright. And then we can go ahead and reattach our new analog thumbstick. Simply slide it through. You'll reconnect the thumbstick to the motherboard. And then slide back in the Z button into place. The next step is to go ahead and reattach those thumbstick screws, which we'll do and then come back. So with the analog thumbstick reattached and screwed in, and our controller cable properly aligned there at the top of the controller, the last step is to reattach the bottom half of the controller casing. And what you're really looking for here, when you attach it, is proper alignment with each of these pegs in the bottom side of the controller casing. Now, you got to be careful because those controller pegs can be snapped off, and they often do. So you have to be really gentle when you push the bottom half of the casing back on. Just make sure you've got it all lined up properly before you start pressing down. If you've got it right, the edging should be very flush between the bottom and top of the controller casing. And once you've made sure that it's looking flush and you're feeling good about it, the last step, of course, is just to pop those screws back into the back of the casing. Well, folks, there you have it. With all the screws put back in place, you have a fully repaired Nintendo 64 controller. One last tip about those screws in the well here, these two screws. It really helps if you have a magnetic screwdriver, because that magnetic screwdriver will hold on to the screw as you drop it into the well. If you don't have a magnetic screwdriver, simply twist the screw slightly onto the screwdriver, and that will help hold it in place as you drop it in. But with all those screws attached, your controller is now completely repaired and ready to go. Keep in mind that everything we used during the repair today is available in our Nintendo 64 controller repair kit. And if this looked like it was too complicated or time-consuming for you, we also offer the Nintendo 64 controller repair service on our website. Again, that website is www.nintendorepairshop.com. And while you're there, check out the Nintendo Repair Center, where we have many other useful Nintendo repair videos available for you, as well as some static repair guides. Thanks for watching today, folks, and as always, happy gaming.